With the announcement of the PS5 Pro, my first thought was, wow, that's a lot of money for a console you can't slip a Blu-ray into. But my second thought was, wait, this might actually be really good for VR, because VR is super demanding, and with more power, surely the VR will be VR-ier than ever. So in today's video, I'm gonna see how much you benefit going from the PS5 to the PS5 Pro using PSVR 2. But before we get into that, today's video is sponsored by Micro Center and their spectacular Black Friday sales event. Not only have they slashed prices on SSDs, laptops, and even flight sim gear, but if you're in the market for some AMD 3D V-Cache action, why not save using a bundle? Or if you're in the market to step up your game from 1080p to 1440p, you should check out this awesome Asus monitor deal. Now if you live in Santa Clara and you feel all left out by all this excitement, don't worry, because there's a Micro Center coming in 2025. So check out all the awesome deals linked below. Now with the PS5 Pro, I find it interesting that straight on the box they mention several times that it doesn't have a disk drive. Oh wow, they do make a big deal of it being maidenless, don't they? I guess they want to make it clear that you need to buy one while you're still in the shop. In the box, in terms of accessories, I also find this interesting. You of course get all the cables you need, which is good, but it comes with the normal PS5 controller and not the Edge controller, which is, my God, that's expensive. Okay, never mind, I guess that makes sense. And then you also get these little plastic thingies, which are apparently feet for it to lie on its side. That's really weird. It smells like a Tokyo subway in this box. Interesting smell aside, the PS5 Pro is smaller than I was expecting, but with a whole bunch of ventilation and clearly visible massive heatsinks. And the I/O is similar to the original PS5 except for the additional USB-C port on the front. Also, the use of this terrible, cheap piano black plastic should be punishable by at least 3 hours in the go-kart battery ball torture machine. Now, an interesting note on the price. When the PS3 launched back in 2006, the 20 gig version of that cost $500, which adjusted for inflation today is more expensive than the PS5 Pro is. But in all fairness, that was also considered wildly expensive. It was also built like a tank and had a Blu-ray player included, which was a huge value back then. Whereas with the PS5 Pro, you're getting 2 terabytes of internal storage, Sony's new upscaling technique, which seems to involve a laser hitting your display or something, and some more GPU power. That's more or less it. But that 45% more GPU performance could make a big difference in VR with your eyes squished right up against the displays. Let's find out. When going through the initial setup process for the PS5 Pro, which obviously despite it being a brand new console already requires several massive updates to be downloaded, but during the whole process I kept thinking that the setup felt disappointingly similar to the standard PS5. I mean, I feel like they could have at least added a Pro to the end of that. I then perused the surprisingly extensive PSVR 2 library where I found something interesting. Oh, what's this? The channel's only 7,000 subscribers away from 700,000. If only there was something you could do with that information. Oh yeah, obviously that exists. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the first game that came out on VR. And another actually interesting thing is there wasn't a huge amount of overlap between PSVR 2 games and PS5 Pro Enhanced. But luckily, the Gran Turismo 7 patch finally dropped, which is the whole reason this video didn't come out earlier. And then there was also No Man's Sky, Resident Evil 4's VR patch, which seems interesting, and some kayaking simulator. There are more, but we're focusing on these for the image quality comparisons in this video, but honestly, I was quite impressed at the extent of the PSVR 2's library. But first things first, I had to get acquainted with the PSVR 2. Luckily, during the setup process, the PSVR really holds your hands, which is super useful for a knuckle dragger like me. But the moment I put the headset on, something jumped out at me. The first thing that's immediately very obvious, the lenses in the Meta Quest are insanely better than the lenses in this. The Fresnel lenses in the PSVR 2 feel like Stone Age technology compared to the pancake lenses in the Quest 3, with a tiny sweet spot in the middle. But anyway, tangent aside, I got settled in quickly. Okay, we need a lot more force feedback in the controllers, because it does not feel like I'm kayaking. I went kayaking recently, so I am an expert on this. There's clearly like a lot of graphical horsepower behind what's going on here. Look at the little penguins. Oh, that's cool. Oh, there's more jiggle to that than I was expecting. But once I finally finished screwing around as a Kraken, it was time to compare some games.
The controls are absolutely butt cheeks in this game.
Wildly terrible controls aside, in No Man's Sky, I did immediately notice a difference going between the two consoles. During spaceflight, the first thing that jumped out to me was the render distance difference between the two consoles. I started with the PS5 Pro and I didn't really notice any render changes with the asteroids as I got closer to them. Whereas when I switched over to the normal PS5, the asteroids stayed a very basic 2D shape until I got really close to them. When they'd finally pop into their full rendered shape, it was honestly really distracting. Now aside from that, it did seem like the normal PS5 was rendering at a lower resolution. I don't know how noticeable that's going to be in the screen capture, but you can definitely see it in the headset. Although the interior of the ship looked very similar between the two versions, there wasn't any significant upgrade in textures between the two, for example. Another interesting thing with how the PlayStation renders VR is there's a massive resolution falloff as you head to the edges of the image. But because of the horrendous off-center performance of the Fresnel lenses, you don't notice at all in the headset. Although looking at the screen capture, I think the PS5 Pro has a slightly less aggressive falloff. Now again, while landing your ship on a planet, the PS5 Pro loaded in things like trees and stuff sooner than the PS5, and then when walking around on the planet, the render resolution difference feels a lot clearer in the headset. But when it comes to the screen capture, I had to really zoom into stills to be able to see the difference, but in the headset that image is really close to your eyes, so it makes sense that you're more sensitive to the difference in the VR headset. Also, the frame rate felt better, which makes a big difference in VR. Now in switching over to Kayaking Game, which again is a PS5 Pro enhanced VR game, there is a difference between the two. Although it is difficult to transcribe that difference in a 2D video, aside from the fact that there's more penguins on the ice in the Pro variant for some reason. I guess penguins are very difficult to render, but when you really zoom into screen captures, you can tell the textures on the ice are higher resolution. The PS5 Pro screenshot is even from further away, but it's still sharper. And when looking at this little ice hole, it's also sharper on the PS5 Pro. So you really have to pixel peep to see the differences in the screen capture, but again, remember this image is like right up against your eye in VR. Although I think it's important to point out that the screen capture is way sharper than what you're seeing in the headset. You can clearly see the individual pixels in the PSVR 2, so despite being able to tell that it's sharper, they're both still pretty fuzzy. And then in terms of frame rate, it again felt like the game was running smoother on the PS5 Pro. Now with Resident Evil 4, initially I wandered around whinging about how you couldn't interact with enough stuff in the environment.
You can't actually interact with anything is really lame. That's one of the things that Alex does super well, is you can pick up anything. And it kind of breaks immersion when you like walk up to a thing with a jar on it and you can't interact with it.
But as I was wandering closer to my inevitable jump scare, the VR was selling the atmosphere really well.
Pretty cool being in the murder cabin. It sells the atmosphere a lot better than just like a monitor does.
And my first interaction with a zombie triggered something primal in me.
Whoa, that did trigger an instinct. I don't know, that was crazy.
Now needing clean underwear aside, RE4 was the game I feel like it made the biggest difference in. Going back to the original PS5 from the PS5 Pro felt like a huge step back in terms of resolution. This was the first game where the difference felt immediately obvious. But with the screen capture, like the other games, I have to really zoom in and nitpick to tell the difference between the two. Like with this one, I was convinced they were both the same screenshot. I had to go back several times and double check that I actually did this correctly. But in the headset, the difference felt apparent and the frame rate felt better. But I could also be going crazy, which is a distinct possibility. Either way, RE4's VR DLC was really fun, if terrifying.
Oh, my lord. Oh. Okay, there we go, that worked.
Now I waited a week for Gran Turismo 7's PS5 Pro update to make this video, and the reason I was willing to wait is I really wanted to try Gran Turismo 7 in VR. I think it's one of the most compelling VR titles on the PS5. And for the week's wait, we got a setting that says it does VR stuff better on the PS5 Pro. So let's turn it on and see what it does. Now straight off the bat, and this is an important difference, the frame rate is noticeably higher on the PS5 Pro in VR. This is with both of the games running with ray trace priority on, and with the normal PS5 you can feel it chugging occasionally in VR, which you never notice on the Pro. as I spin out because I was caught off guard by the absurd amount of power I gave my GR86. Now when it comes to visual fidelity, again like with RE4, I felt like in the headset I could tell a decent difference in terms of rendered resolution. But again like with RE4, the zoomed in screenshot just looks the same to me. And the same thing goes for the VR showroom. It's maybe a little bit sharper on the PS5, but even in the headset they looked pretty similar to me. So after spending 4 days A/Bing between the two consoles, I feel like the PS5 Pro makes VR look a little bit better, and it definitely runs more smoothly, which helps in VR quite a bit. But my opinion on it, and the conclusion of this video, which may upset some people because people get all triggered when I complain about the visual fidelity of VR for some reason, but I feel like the PSVR 2 is the main visual fidelity bottleneck in the setup. So in my opinion, upgrading to the PS5 Pro for your PSVR 2 feels a little bit like polishing a turd. I'm not saying the PSVR 2 is a turd, but the analogy stands. You can polish a poo until your fingers bleed. At best, you're just going to be left with slightly shinier crap. And with that conclusion, I look forward to all the VR enthusiasts taking turns defiling my mailbox. If you enjoyed the video, however, subscribe to the channel, like, maybe watch another video. A suggestion will pop up in a second, and until the next video, bye-bye.